The metallic crack echoed across my pasture before I even killed the truck engine. Not the sharp pop of frozen pipe. Not a rifle. Steel biting through pressurized water line. I smelled wet clay before I saw the trench. A yellow excavator idled beside my south fence, diesel hanging heavy in the cool Texas morning. Muddy water pooled around a freshly exposed section of 12-inch pipe, while 3 contractors stood silently watching it drain into the pasture like someone bleeding out. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, already running. One of the men raised both hands before I reached him. "Sir, don't step in there." Another looked everywhere except at me. "We've got work orders." The words hit harder than the ruined pipe. 40 years my family's ranch had never gone a single summer morning without water reaching the livestock troughs. Now the familiar hiss that usually echoed through the irrigation manifold had gone completely silent. Silence has a sound when you've lived somewhere long enough. I vaulted the fence anyway. The smell of fresh-cut limestone mixed with diesel exhaust and wet earth filled the air. My boots sank into the muddy trench as I followed the severed pipeline until my eyes landed on something that made me stop cold. Half buried beneath the clay sat an old brass valve housing. Its surface was green with age. The cast lettering was barely visible beneath decades of mineral stains. I hadn't seen that valve uncovered since I was 12 years old. My grandfather Hank had crouched beside it one August afternoon, brushing dirt away with his weathered hands while the cicadas screamed from the oak trees. "You remember this, Ethan," he'd told me. "This valve controls more than water." At the time, I thought he was just talking like old ranchers always talked, turning everything into some kind of lesson. Now it sat exposed like a buried secret someone had accidentally dug out. A white SUV rolled onto the access road. Even before the dust settled, I recognized Victoria Hensley's oversized sunglasses and perfectly pressed white blouse. She stepped out smiling. Not nervous, not apologetic. Victorious. "Morning, Mr. Calloway." Her perfume somehow reached me through diesel fumes. "I was hoping we'd finally catch you before you started another unauthorized repair." I stared at her. "My water line is laying in the dirt." She folded her arms. "Our engineer confirmed this utility crosses Cedar Ridge common property." She nodded toward the trench. "Which means it belongs to the association." One of the contractors shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am." She silenced him with a glance. "We're simply correcting an ownership issue that's existed for years." I looked from her polished shoes to the muddy excavation. Beyond the hill, I could already hear cattle gathering near empty troughs. They knew before people did. Animals always know when water stops moving. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Without another word, I started recording. The contractors, the excavator, the cut ends of the pipe, the utility markers lying crooked in the dirt where someone had scraped across them with the excavator bucket. One orange survey stake had been snapped completely in half. Vicky noticed where my camera paused. "Oh, documenting things?" she asked with a laugh. "I'd recommend you film the property markers too." "I am. They show the line enters HOA land." I zoomed closer. Not the property marker. The brass identification plate bolted to the valve housing. Still crusted with dirt. Still untouched. The contractor nearest me cleared his throat. "Sir, for what it's worth, we only followed the plans they gave us." He held up a folded packet. The top page read, "Cedar Ridge Estates. Water infrastructure relocation." Across the bottom sat a familiar signature. Victoria Hensley. She reached for the papers before my camera caught more than a second. "That's enough filming." I smiled for the first time all morning. No, I kept recording. Every torn utility flag, every shovel mark, every contractor standing exactly where they'd been told to stand. I wasn't repairing a single inch of pipe. Not yet, because once fresh fittings replaced broken steel, the trench would disappear. So would whatever story this ground still had to tell. Behind me, the first cattle began pushing against the dry trough fence, their impatient bawling rolling across the ranch in waves. Vicky listened for a moment before putting her sunglasses back on. "You'll have water again," she said, "as soon as you recognize whose system you've been using." Then she climbed into her SUV and drove away. She never looked back at the old brass valve, which told me she had absolutely no idea what she'd just uncovered. The dust from Vicky's SUV hadn't settled before I climbed into my own truck and headed for the north pasture. The cattle were already crowding the concrete trough, nudging dry steel with growing frustration. Their low, restless bawling rolled across the hills, mixing with the steady hum of cicadas. Nothing makes a rancher feel more helpless than hearing thirsty animals waiting for water that should already be there. I shut off the automatic pumps before they burned themselves out trying to push water through an open line. Every unnecessary minute meant another expense. Every careless repair meant another piece of evidence gone forever. Laura met me outside the equipment barn carrying 2 thick binders against her chest. I figured you'd need these. She knew me well enough not to ask whether I planned to fight. Only how. The binders smelled faintly of old paper and machine oil, the scent of our family's office tucked behind the workshop where every repair, inspection, and maintenance record had been stored for decades. Granddad believed memories failed. Paper didn't. We spread everything across the workbench. Inspection reports, pump maintenance logs, old survey sketches, handwritten service records dating back long before Cedar Ridge Estates existed. I ran my fingers across one yellowing maintenance sheet. Every few years, Granddad had serviced the same brass valve now sitting exposed in that trench. The handwriting never changed. Valve inspected. Valve lubricated. Protect access. Always those same 2 words. Protect access. Laura looked up from another folder. That's the 3rd time he wrote that. I noticed. What did he mean? I wished I knew. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. Certified electronic delivery. Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I opened it. The first page carried their logo. The second carried my name. The third carried a bill. Emergency Infrastructure Correction Assessment. $18,740. Payment due within 14 days. Failure to comply may result in collection proceedings, liens, suspension of utility access, and additional board action. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so unbelievably bold. They cut my water line, then sent me the invoice. Laura didn't laugh. They're serious. I know. Half an hour later, another pickup rolled through the ranch gate. Different company, different uniforms. 2 men stepped out carrying bright orange paint, measuring wheels, and rolled engineering drawings. We're here to verify future relocation. Relocation of what? The community transmission line. I folded my arms. This isn't community anything. One of them politely unfolded a large map across the hood of his truck. Colored utility overlays. Subdivision streets. Drainage easements. Everything looked professionally prepared. Then something caught my eye. The blue line representing my water system didn't stop where my ranch boundary ended. It continued straight through property my family had never sold, as if someone had simply drawn a cleaner route. You've got the wrong alignment. The younger surveyor frowned. This came directly from the HOA. I don't care where it came from. I pointed toward an old live oak nearly 200 yards away. The actual line runs west of that tree. He checked the drawing again. His expression changed just enough for me to notice. Not panic. Confusion. His supervisor quickly rolled the map shut. We're only here to confirm measurements. They packed everything back into their truck far faster than they'd unpacked it. Neither man argued. Neither man apologized. They simply left. That bothered me more than if they'd stayed. Good surveyors usually defend their work. These 2 looked like they didn't want to own it. By late afternoon, I drove back to the damaged trench. The contractors were gone. The excavator was gone. But fresh tire tracks circled the excavation. Someone had returned after I left. Near the broken survey marker, I noticed something I was certain hadn't been there that morning. A small aluminum reference tag had been driven into the ground. Brand new. Its stamped identification number began with the current year. Impossible. That marker supposedly represented infrastructure that had existed for decades. I crouched beside it, brushing loose dirt away with my glove. The fresh concrete around its base hadn't even finished curing. Someone wasn't just claiming my water system anymore. They were rebuilding the paper trail to match the story they wanted everyone else to believe. And if they were willing to rewrite the ground itself, this wasn't one overconfident HOA president making bad decisions. It was a coordinated plan that had started long before they ever put a bucket into my ranch. I didn't pull the aluminum marker out of the ground. I photographed it from every angle instead. The evening sun caught the fresh concrete around its base, still damp enough to leave a fingerprint if someone was careless. Whoever installed it had wanted the marker to look permanent. They just hadn't given it enough time to pretend it was old. I slipped a tape measure from my truck, measured its distance from the broken orange survey stake, then photographed both together. Context mattered. A single picture of a marker meant nothing. A picture showing a brand new marker sitting beside one that had clearly been crushed by excavation equipment told a very different story. By the time I finished, Laura was already waiting in the ranch office with my laptop open. I downloaded the security footage. Anything useful? She shrugged. Depends. The camera overlooking the south pasture had only captured the entrance road. The trench itself sat just outside its view, exactly where whoever planned the excavation had chosen to work. Bad luck. Or good planning. We watched 2 hours of footage anyway. At 5:47 that morning, the excavation crew entered exactly as expected. At 6:02, Vicky's white SUV arrived. Nothing surprising. But 12 minutes after I left the ranch to check the cattle, another pickup appeared. No company logo, no trailer, no equipment. The driver stepped out carrying something long and narrow. He disappeared behind the dirt pile for less than 3 minutes before driving away. Laura paused the frame. Can you zoom? I enlarged the image until the pixels began breaking apart. The object wasn't a shovel. It wasn't a survey rod either. It looked almost exactly the length of the aluminum reference marker now sitting beside the trench. I think he installed it. I think so too. Still wasn't proof. Just another piece. The next morning I drove into the county engineering office. The building smelled like coffee, printer toner, and old blueprints. Exactly the way government engineering departments always smell. A clerk named Melissa greeted me with practiced politeness. What can I help you with? I'm trying to verify a utility reference marker. She typed the identification number into her computer. Nothing. She frowned. Can you check again? She did. Still nothing. That's odd. Why? Our field markers are entered before installation. She turned the monitor slightly toward herself. I don't have anything with that identification. So it doesn't exist? I didn't say that. Her smile disappeared. I said it isn't in my system. She lowered her voice. If someone installed a county marker yesterday, we'd have paperwork. Yesterday, not decades ago. Exactly what I'd suspected. Before she could say anything else, another employee walked around the corner carrying rolled engineering drawings. His eyes landed on the number I'd written on my notepad. Then on me. Recognition flashed across his face. Only for a second. Melissa. His tone was calm. We'll handle utility inquiries through Public Works from now on. She immediately straightened. Of course. He smiled politely at me. If you'll submit a formal records request, someone will contact you. It wasn't rude. It was practiced. Like a conversation ending before it wandered somewhere inconvenient. Outside, I sat in my truck without starting it. Public records requests usually took days. Sometimes weeks. Too slow. Someone was moving dirt while paperwork crawled. I unfolded the engineering overlay the surveyors had accidentally shown me. Most of it looked professionally drafted. Clean line weights. Correct parcel numbers. County formatting. Then I noticed something I'd missed the day before. Near the lower corner sat a revision block. Revision A, Revision B, Revision C. The latest entry had been added only 6 weeks earlier. Description: utility alignment updated. No engineer's seal. No license number. No approval signature. Just initials. V. H. Victoria Hensley. Former real estate broker. Not an engineer. Not a surveyor. Yet somehow she had authorized changes to a utility alignment drawing. I carefully slid the map into a protective document sleeve before it could crease. If she was willing to alter engineering records, then the trench wasn't the beginning of this fight. It was simply the first time I'd caught up with it. And for the first time since that pipe was cut, I knew exactly what I needed next. Not another argument with Vicky. The original subdivision plans. The original subdivision plans. That single thought stayed with me all the way back to the ranch. But by the time I reached my front gate, Cedar Ridge had already made its next move. A white envelope had been taped to the mailbox. Not mailed. Hand-delivered. The HOA seal stared back at me. Inside were 3 separate notices. Unauthorized interference with community infrastructure. Obstruction of scheduled utility improvements. Failure to cooperate with board-authorized engineering activity. Each carried another fine. Another deadline. Another threat. Together, they totaled just over $24,000. At the bottom of the final page sat one sentence that made my stomach tighten. Failure to resolve these violations may result in legal action to obtain permanent operational control of the affected utility corridor. Operational control. They weren't talking about repairing one damaged pipe anymore. They wanted the entire corridor. Laura read the notices without saying a word. When she finished, she quietly laid them beside the workbench instead of throwing them away. They're building a record. I know. If this reaches court, they'll say you've been refusing every reasonable request. She was right. Paper accumulates. Truth doesn't always keep up. That afternoon, my phone started ringing. First came our feed supplier. Ethan, I heard Cedar Ridge says the county's taking over your water system. I've heard that too. Then our hay contractor. They told me there might be access restrictions. You still want next week's delivery? Even the local bank manager called. Nothing accusatory. Just careful. We've received notice of a potential infrastructure dispute affecting the ranch. News traveled fast in rural counties. Especially bad news. By sunset, I'd realized something uncomfortable. Vicky wasn't fighting me only with excavators. She was managing expectations. If enough people believed the ranch's water system belonged to the HOA, then every future action she took would seem reasonable. That evening, I drove back to the south pasture. Fresh tire tracks crossed the grass again. Someone had returned. This time they hadn't touched the trench. Instead, they'd placed temporary orange construction fencing around the excavation. A laminated sign hung from a steel post. Authorized personnel only, Cedar Ridge Water Improvement Project. I smiled despite myself. Water improvement. They'd cut the only functioning line feeding 400 acres. I photographed the sign, the fencing, the tire tracks. Then I stepped back outside the barrier. I could have walked straight through, could have pulled every stake out of the ground. Instead, I left everything exactly where it was. Sometimes the strongest evidence is untouched evidence. As I packed my camera away, an unfamiliar pickup slowed on the county road. The driver watched me, didn't wave, didn't stop, just kept rolling at 5 miles an hour until he disappeared over the hill. I memorized the license plate anyway. Back at the ranch house, Laura met me on the porch. Our insurance adjuster called. Already. They received notice from Cedar Ridge. I looked at her. They're claiming the damage happened during a shared utility relocation. Shared. That word again. Every version of their story sounded slightly different. Community infrastructure. Operational corridor. Shared utility. Each phrase nudged the truth a little farther away. Before bed, I copied every photo and video onto 2 separate hard drives. One stayed in the office safe. The other Laura sealed inside a waterproof case and hid where only the 2 of us knew. Maybe I was being overly cautious. Maybe not. The next morning proved it wasn't enough. At sunrise, a convoy of county-sized dump trucks rolled toward the south pasture. Not one. 5. Each loaded with crushed limestone. Behind them came a bulldozer hauling a steel compactor. I pulled onto the shoulder before they reached the ranch entrance. The lead driver rolled down his window. You Ethan Calloway? Yeah. He handed me a work packet. We've been contracted to build an all-weather service road through this section. I unfolded the first page. The proposed road ran directly over the open trench, straight across the exposed brass valve. If they buried everything beneath 12 inches of compacted limestone and asphalt, every scrape mark, broken survey stake, fresh marker, and disturbed utility plate I'd spent days preserving would disappear beneath a permanent roadway. And once that happened, there would be no digging the truth back out. The first dump truck rolled past me before I could finish reading the work packet. Crushed limestone rattled against its steel bed like hail. Behind it came the bulldozer, its tracks grinding across the county road with a deep metallic growl that I felt through the steering wheel before I heard it. I stepped into the lane and raised both hands. The driver stopped. I'm preserving evidence, I said. You bury that trench, and it's gone. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. I've got a signed work order, sir. I don't care. I have to. He pointed toward another SUV pulling up behind the convoy. White. Perfectly clean. Victoria Hensley climbed out holding a clipboard instead of sunglasses this time. You've delayed this project long enough, Ethan. This isn't your project. She handed another document to the foreman. County access permit. Not a court order. Not ownership. Just permission to improve an access corridor. Enough to keep the contractors moving. I photographed every page before anyone could stop me. Then I walked straight to the exposed brass valve. For a second, I considered standing over it, making them physically remove me. Instead, I looked at the cameras clipped to every contractor's safety vest. That would become the story, not the road. I stepped back. Record everything, I quietly told Laura. She nodded without speaking. The bulldozer eased forward. Its blade pushed loose soil over the broken pipe first, then over the snapped survey stake. The orange construction fence disappeared beneath a rolling wave of dirt. Fresh limestone followed. The smell of crushed rock mixed with diesel exhaust until even the scent of wet clay vanished. By noon the trench was gone. The brass valve disappeared beneath compacted stone. So did the broken utility markers I'd spent days documenting in place. Watching it happen felt like attending a funeral where you weren't allowed to speak. By afternoon, the new road looked like it had always belonged there. Neighbors slowed to admire it. One rancher tipped his hat. Looks like they finally fixed that old line. I forced a smile. They fixed something. Word spread faster than the dust settled. Social media filled with photos of the new emergency service road. The HOA praised itself for investing in community infrastructure. Someone even commented that the Callaway Ranch should be grateful the subdivision was modernizing outdated utilities. Grateful. Meanwhile, I paid another $4,000 to keep emergency water trucks running. The cattle drank. The ranch survived. Barely. That evening my insurance company called again. Their investigators sounded apologetic. Given the ongoing ownership dispute, we're suspending infrastructure coverage until liability is determined. Exactly what Vicky wanted. Pressure from every direction. I sat alone inside the equipment barn after sunset. The workbench was covered with binders, maintenance logs, photos, invoices. Everything I'd carefully assembled suddenly felt smaller than one paved road. Maybe I had waited too long. Maybe preserving evidence instead of demanding an injunction had been a mistake. Laura walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Then she quietly slid one photograph across the table. The last picture before they covered everything. It showed the exposed trench, the brass valve, the broken survey stake, and one contractor kneeling beside the new aluminum marker. I almost pushed it aside. Then something stopped me. His gloved hand wasn't installing the marker. He was pointing toward it. Behind him stood the foreman, holding the work packet open. The page facing outward wasn't the road permit. It was the engineering overlay I'd photographed earlier. I leaned closer. Across the bottom corner, just visible beneath the foreman's thumb, sat the revision block. Revision C. Utility alignment updated. Initials VH. But something else caught my eye. A thin blue stamp crossed part of the page. Not an engineering seal. Not a county approval. Just one word. Copy. I froze. Every document Vicky had waved around. Every map the surveyors carried. Every drawing authorizing excavation. None of them had been originals. They'd buried the trench. They'd buried the valve. But the only plans I'd ever seen were copies. Which meant someone still had the originals. And suddenly the road over my evidence didn't feel like the end of the story. It felt like someone was desperately trying to keep me from finding where the real one began. I stared at that faint blue copy stamp until the coffee beside me went cold. It wasn't centered. It wasn't part of the printed drawing. Someone had run an already existing engineering plan through a copier, and the machine had stamped it automatically across the lower margin. That mattered, because every licensed engineering drawing I'd ever submitted during 20 years of civil work followed one simple rule. Copies were for reference. Originals carried seals. I pulled the plastic sleeve containing the subdivision overlay onto the workbench and laid it beside Granddad's old maintenance binder. Laura slid another lamp closer. You think it's fake? I think it's incomplete. There's a difference. I traced the revision block with my finger. Revision A, Revision B, Revision C. Only Revision C lacked an engineer's license number. Only Revision C carried V, H, S initials. And only Revision C redirected the water line onto property that had somehow become HOA infrastructure. I opened my laptop and compared the overlay with the photographs I'd taken before the trench disappeared. The snapped orange survey stake, the county utility marker, the fresh aluminum tag. Every image lined up with one uncomfortable conclusion. They hadn't moved the pipe. They'd moved the paperwork. Laura quietly opened another binder. The maintenance records. I nodded. She flipped through decades of handwritten entries until we found the same valve inspection pages again. Each inspection included a reference number. At first I assumed it was simply Granddad's filing system. Then I noticed something I'd overlooked. Every number began with the same 4 letters. CWD, County Water District. Granddad hadn't invented his own code. He'd been recording district asset references every time he serviced the valve. The valve had always existed inside an official maintenance system, just not the HOAs. I picked up the phone. Daniel Ruiz answered on the third ring. The county engineer I'd met years earlier during a culvert inspection recognized my voice immediately. Ethan, I need a favor. What kind? I've got historical maintenance reference numbers. A pause. Where'd you get them? My grandfather. Another pause. Email me everyone. Nothing more. No promises. No theories. Just practical. Exactly why I trusted him. Within an hour, every maintenance page had been scanned twice. Once onto an encrypted drive. Once onto a second drive Laura sealed inside the office safe beside the security footage. I wasn't losing evidence twice. By late afternoon, Daniel called back. His voice sounded different. More cautious. Ethan, you found something. I found records. He stopped there. I can't discuss details over the phone. My pulse quickened. Were the reference numbers real? They match archived district inspections. I closed my eyes. Granddad hadn't just been maintaining ranch equipment. Someone from the county had inspected that valve repeatedly over decades. Daniel continued carefully. I also found something else. What? The most recent district inspection on that control point predates Cedar Ridge Estates entirely. The room went completely quiet. Laura looked at me without speaking. Daniel wasn't finished. If somebody changed utility alignment after subdivision approval, he let the sentence die on its own. That paperwork should leave a chain. Should. Not always. But enough. I'll need formal requests before I can release anything. I understand. When the call ended, I opened a fresh evidence binder instead of celebrating. Photographs, maintenance logs, survey marker measurements, security footage timestamps, HOA notices, contractor invoices, insurance suspension. Everything received its own numbered tab. Facts first, conclusions later. The pattern was finally beginning to hold together. The fresh aluminum marker. The copied engineering overlay. Granddad's County Water District references. The unauthorized revision C. None of them proved fraud alone. Together, they proved something had changed after the subdivision was built. Something important enough that someone had paved over a trench rather than answer questions about it. For the first time since my water line had been cut, I stopped reacting. I started preparing. Rebecca Sloan arrived just before sunset carrying nothing but a legal pad and a worn leather briefcase. I handed her the organized binder without saying a word. She spent nearly 20 minutes turning pages. No interruptions. No dramatic reactions. Only quiet concentration. Finally, she closed the cover. You've done exactly what most people don't. What? You preserved chronology. She tapped the binder once. If we're right, this isn't about arguing over property. She looked toward the window where the new limestone road disappeared into the distance. It's about proving which version of history was officially recorded. I nodded once. Then I signed the formal request authorizing Rebecca to obtain the complete subdivision engineering file and every archived county water district inspection associated with Granddad's maintenance references. By the time she walked out the door carrying the binder, the counterattack had already begun. Vicky just didn't know she'd been invited into it. Rebecca filed the records request the moment she reached her office. Not by email. Not by fax. She walked it into the county water district herself and had the clerk stamp the receipt while the office security camera watched. By 9 the next morning, I had a scanned copy of that timestamp sitting in 3 different folders. One in my laptop, one on the encrypted drive, one in Laura's safe. If somebody claimed the request had never existed, they'd have to explain why the county had already acknowledged receiving it. Around noon, my phone rang. Mr. Calloway? The voice was clipped and professional. This is Cedar Ridge Estates. The board requests your attendance at tonight's special infrastructure meeting. Requests. Notifies. Requires. The wording had changed. I'll be there. Please bring any documentation supporting your ownership claims. I smiled. I was planning to. The meeting was held inside the subdivision clubhouse, a building that smelled of fresh coffee, lemon polish, and expensive carpet that had never seen a pair of muddy work boots. Homeowners filled nearly every folding chair. Some recognized me. Some deliberately looked away. A projector illuminated the front wall where Vicky stood beside an enlarged utility map. The same overlay. Revision C. Still no engineer's seal. Still the same blue copy stamp faintly crossing the lower corner. She didn't even notice it. Or maybe she'd looked at that drawing so many times she'd stopped seeing it. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we're here because one property owner has refused to cooperate with essential community infrastructure improvements." Several heads turned toward me. She continued without hesitation. "Our engineering review confirms the disputed water corridor has always functioned as subdivision infrastructure." Always. Interesting choice. I quietly opened my notebook. Every page already numbered. Every timestamp already prepared. Vicky clicked the remote. A new slide appeared showing the freshly paved access road. "Our contractors completed emergency stabilization." Applause. Light. Polite. Exactly the reaction she'd expected. Then she looked directly at me. "Mr. Calloway, if you possess legitimate engineering evidence contradicting our findings, now would be an appropriate time." Rebecca had warned me about this. Never reveal more than necessary. Not yet. I stood. "I have questions." Vicky smiled. "Of course. When was Revision C created?" Silence. She glanced toward another board member before answering. "During our infrastructure review." "What date?" "It isn't relevant." "It is to me." Another uncomfortable pause. Finally, she picked up a folder from the podium. 6 weeks ago. Exactly what I'd already seen. I wrote it down. "What licensed engineer approved Revision C?" "Our consultants." "Name." "Our engineering consultants." Rebecca remained seated behind me without saying a word. Vicky's confidence slipped almost imperceptibly. Only someone watching closely would notice. "I don't have that information in front of me." I nodded once. No further questions. That seemed to irritate her more than an argument would have. She reached beneath the podium and lifted another document. "The board has one final resolution." A volunteer distributed copies through the audience. Even before mine reached my hands, I recognized the language. Resolution 24-17. Official adoption of the revised utility alignment. Effective immediately. Vicky picked up a pen. "I'll now execute the board's approval." She signed first. Then each board member followed. 6 signatures. One after another. Every page passed beneath the clubhouse document camera so homeowners could watch the resolution being finalized on the projector screen. Every signature. Every timestamp. Every revision number. Everything permanently preserved by the meeting recording system mounted high above the audience. I never interrupted. I simply watched. Because for the first time since this started, Vicky wasn't talking about what had happened years ago. She was creating a brand new official record. One she believed would bury mine forever. When the final board member signed, she looked at me with quiet satisfaction. "There," she said. "The matter is officially settled." I carefully closed my notebook. "No," I answered calmly. "It's officially recorded." She mistook the difference for surrender. Rebecca didn't. As the meeting adjourned, she leaned close enough that only I could hear her. "They just adopted Revision C after our records request was already filed." I looked once more at the signed resolution lying beneath the document camera. The board had voluntarily attached their names, dates, and authority to the very revision we'd been questioning. No one in that room realized what they'd just preserved. But there was no taking it back now. Whatever happened next would unfold on a record they had created themselves. I barely made it home before Rebecca called. They responded. To the record's request? No. A pause. They responded because they finally looked. The next morning, the County Water District conference room smelled of old blueprints, burnt coffee, and fresh copier toner. Daniel Ruiz stood at one end of the table with 2 large document tubes beside him. Across from him sat Rebecca and me. An empty chair waited at the far end. Vicky arrived 5 minutes late. She carried the same binder she displayed at the HOA meeting, walking with the confidence of someone who believed the paperwork was already settled. "I'm only here as a courtesy," she announced. Daniel didn't answer. He simply rolled the first drawing across the table. Heavy linen paper. Not a photocopy. Not a scan. An original engineering sheet. The embossed seal caught the overhead lights. I recognized Granddad's familiar maintenance reference in the lower corner. CWD 0417. The same prefix that had appeared in every maintenance log we'd preserved. Daniel laid my grandfather's handwritten maintenance record beside it. Then he placed the photograph of the exposed brass valve next to both. 3 pieces, 40 years apart, perfectly matching reference numbers. Vicky leaned forward. "Those don't prove ownership." "No," Daniel said evenly. "They prove continuity." He pointed to the original drawing. This control valve was accepted into the County Water District Inspection Program in 1982. He moved his finger along the easement line. The subdivision shown on your revision C did not exist until 17 years later. The room fell silent. Rebecca slid another document across the table. The recorded easement she'd requested after filing the formal authorization. Not new evidence. The official record connected to the maintenance references we'd spent days organizing. Its legal description matched the engineering drawing exactly. More importantly, the protected control point described in the easement sat precisely where the brass valve had been buried beneath Vicky's new road. Vicky straightened. Our consultants concluded the utility alignment changed. Daniel nodded once. They're welcome to conclude that. He opened a second document tube. This is the complete subdivision approval package. Another original. Another embossed seal. Every revision from A through B carried the same licensed engineer's signature. There was no revision C. At least not in the county archive. Rebecca quietly placed the enlarged copy from the HOA meeting beside the originals. Blue copy stamp. V. H. Initials. No engineering seal. No county filing stamp. No approval signature. Just exactly what I'd noticed days earlier. Vicky folded her arms. You're saying someone forgot to submit paperwork. Daniel looked directly at her. I'm saying this revision was never approved because it was never submitted. She tried another angle. The board adopted it. You adopted a copy. His voice never rose. You cannot amend a recorded utility alignment through an HOA board resolution. I watched something change across the faces of the county staff. Not excitement. Recognition. The story they'd been hearing for weeks no longer fit the documents in front of them. Rebecca opened the final folder. Inside were the contractor work orders, the photographs of the broken survey marker, the fresh aluminum reference tag, the security footage timestamps, and the signed resolution 24-17. She arranged them in order. Nothing dramatic. Just chronology. You authorized excavation, she said. You adopted the unapproved revision after a formal records request had already been filed. She tapped the maintenance logs. And you paved over the protected control point before county verification. Vicky glanced toward the door as if looking for someone to rescue the meeting. No one moved. Daniel closed both document tubes. I'm issuing an immediate field verification order. He turned toward another county employee. Schedule a supervised excavation of the control point and suspend all reliance on revision C pending inspection. The clerk wrote without hesitation. Daniel looked back at Vicky. Until that inspection is complete, no further work may be performed under the authority of your revised alignment. For the first time since my water line had been cut, Vicky didn't have another document to hold up. She only had the copy she'd convinced everyone else to believe. Now the county wanted to see what was buried underneath it. The county excavation order went into effect before noon. By sunrise the next day, Daniel Ruiz was standing beside the limestone road with 2 inspectors, a survey crew, and a county videographer. Sheriff Mason Brooks parked near the ranch gate, not because anyone expected violence, but because nobody was going to interfere with the inspection. The same road Vicky had built to bury the truth was cut open one measured section at a time. Steel teeth bit through compacted stone. Dust rolled across the pasture. Then the excavator bucket lifted away the final layer of soil, and the old brass valve appeared exactly where Granddad's records said it would be. Green with age. Scarred by the original excavation. Still carrying the identification plate Vicky's contractors had paved over. Daniel crouched beside it and cleaned the lettering with a soft brush. CWD 0417. The county videographer moved closer. So did Vicky. She said nothing. The survey crew measured the control point against the original easement description. The coordinates matched within inches. They traced the ranch line west of the live oak, not along the route shown on revision C. That clean blue line on Vicky's map had never represented anything underground. It existed only on paper. The fresh aluminum marker was removed next. Its number had never been entered into the county system, and its concrete base tested newer than the road built above it. By afternoon, Daniel issued the written finding. The brass valve and protected corridor belonged to the Callaway Ranch easement. The HOA had no ownership interest, no operational authority, no lawful right to cut the line. The title conflict was settled in a single sentence beneath the county seal. Then came the part Vicky had never considered. Inspectors followed the downstream branches and found 3 unauthorized HOA irrigation connections tied into the protected corridor. Cedar Ridge had been watering its entrance landscaping, clubhouse grounds, and decorative pond through infrastructure it claimed I had stolen from them. Daniel handed me a temporary operating authorization. Close the control point until those connections are removed. I wrapped my hand around the old brass wheel. For 1 second, I could almost feel Granddad beside me, his weathered fingers brushing clay from the housing. This valve controls more than water. I turned it slowly. Metal groaned beneath my palm. Somewhere beyond the hill, Cedar Ridge's sprinklers coughed, hissed, and fell silent. My ranch line remained isolated for repair. Their unauthorized branches did not. That difference was the whole case. The HOA's insurer eventually covered restoration of the cut pipe and most of my documented losses: emergency water deliveries, veterinary costs, damaged irrigation, and the income lost while the south fields went dry. The road section above the valve was rebuilt with a permanent county access box instead of hidden stone. Vicky resigned before the next board meeting. The other directors removed her authority to sign contracts immediately and voted to cooperate with the county investigation. Her personal liability remained limited to the excavation and record decisions she had signed despite contractor warnings. No prison spectacle, no dramatic arrest, just lawyers, invoices, depositions, and consequences carrying her own signature. Cedar Ridge homeowners elected a new board 3 weeks later. Some apologized. Most simply looked embarrassed. The ranchers who had stopped returning my calls started waving again, cautious at first, then normally. Laura replaced Granddad's binders in the safe after adding 1 final tab. Resolved. When the new pipe was pressure tested, I walked alone to the north pasture. The cattle heard the water before I did. A low rush moved through the buried line. Then the trough valve opened with a clean metallic hiss, and cold water poured into concrete that had sat dry for weeks. The animals crowded forward. Morning light flashed across the surface. Behind me, beyond the repaired road, the brass valve rested beneath a county-marked cover where no HOA map could quietly erase it again. I stood there listening to water move across land my family had protected for 4 generations. Justice hadn't arrived with shouting. It had arrived through measurements, records, signatures, and one old valve they never had rights to.